Hello everyone, Ace here, and today, well, I've got a video for you. I promised you something special last time, and here it is. This is an article from the Global Comment, where the world thinks out loud. And it's an article written by Landon Wright, and it's titled, Did World War II Ever End? The rage over Battlefield 5 suggests maybe not. It's a rather interesting way to title the article, so let's find out what's so special in this, shall we? The reveal trailer for the 5th installment of Electronic Arts and DICE's acclaimed Battlefield series was odd. It was the first time the shooter series returned to World War II since its initial game, Battlefield 1942, and the tone of the trailer was strange for what many expected. But unfortunately, while the odd tone of the trailer was noteworthy, what many within the gaming community latched onto was the inclusion of women and minorities, and it unleashed a fury of raw hatred, far more real than anything the game portrays. Okay, so there is a little bit to take away from this. First of all, I have to say that Battlefield 5 was neither the 5th installment of the Battlefield franchise, nor was it the first one since Battlefield 1942 to cover World War II. In fact, if you actually look at it, Battlefield 1943 covered World War II. Battlefield Heroes was definitely inspired by World War II at the very least. And then when we look at official mods, such as the Battlefield 1942 conversion mod for Battlefield Vietnam that was officially released by DICE in the Battlefield Vietnam Redux, Battlefield 5 was actually the 5th game by that standard to actually cover World War II within the franchise. And that's before even mentioning the Bad Company 2 prologue mission that was also set in World War II and came out prior to Battlefield 5. But that's just one mission out of an entire game, so I think we can let that one slide. Our society has a problem with angry young men online. It's something mainstream media have reported on recently, particularly with the Toronto killings from April of this year from an incel that sent the news media into deep and dark places of the internet. A lot of people were shocked that such a subculture existed. Those who followed and participated in the gaming community online weren't too surprised. This kind of attitude had been developing slowly over the years among young men in gaming. It's been developing everywhere, frankly, but gaming is where the signs started to show first and the worst. Okay, so first of all, let's go ahead and debunk the whole argument about why the Toronto Killer is relevant here. First of all, the Toronto Killer was not actually really much of a gamer. Okay, yes, he did have a Steam account, but it's been inactive since 2010, at least according to this Vice article. Now, granted, it is an article from Vice, so take it with a grain of salt, but I'm willing to believe that even if they can't spin him into some major gamer, then obviously he wasn't that much into gaming. In fact, even his Steam account proudly proclaims that his favorite games were Halo 3 and Halo ODST, which were even vastly outdated by the standards of 2010. My point here is that he was into nothing more than normie tier mainstream games at best. My second point is that incels do not represent the rule of thumb even within the bounds of the gaming community. Far from it, in fact. For example, the Virgin vs. Chad meme is a great example of how gamers themselves actually thumb their noses down at the incel community as well. This is of course neither to say that there are no incels within the gaming community or that no one within the gaming community likes incels, but they are definitely far from commonplace and far from the norm. The reaction to Battlefield 5's reveal was harsh but not unpredictable. It echoed the Gamergate controversy, where people dressed up their obvious issues with women as concerns about ethics and journalism, and a primary online movement drove several women out of the industry. Reddit and YouTube were aflame with anger about the SJW agenda, or the forced feminism, or whatever other dog whistle you choose to cover up meaning having women and minorities now. You know, it's actually rather amusing how much this author hopes that the audience is ignorant of Battlefield's history or gaming history in general. For a start, the last game in the Battlefield franchise, specifically Battlefield 1, had both playable women and playable minorities within both the campaign and later the multiplayer modes. And the like to dislike ratio of the trailers on YouTube, as well as the sales of the game in general, demonstrate quite clearly that gamers had no problem with women or minorities within Battlefield 1, which, just like Battlefield 5, is a historically set game. In fact, I would argue that a more apt comparison controversy-wise with Battlefield 5 would be Fallout 76, which of course no one is complaining about having women or minorities within Fallout 76, but completely irrespective of that, the game has still managed to alienate its fanbase quite consistently, and for reasons that aren't actually that dissimilar to Battlefield 5 once you get into the nitty and gritty. And I'll be explaining the similarities after the next paragraph, but there is something else I need to discuss really quick. and that's the fact that the Gamergate movement was legitimately about ethics in journalism. And a great deal of that happens to be because, contrary to what this author here wants you to believe, there was a great number of controversies leading up to the Gamergate movement within game journalism itself, such as, for two very famous examples, the firing of Jeff Gerstmann from GameSpot for his review of Kane and Lynch, as well as the notorious Dorito-gate incident regarding Jeff Keighley. Anyways, moving on. A lot of complaints were disguised as fears of historical accuracy. Women and minorities on the battlefield of World War II? Those aren't in the history books, they said. Of course they actually are. And what's not in the history books is that soldiers got shot, hid in a bush, and regenerated their health. But you'll never see complaints about that. One of the most humorous episodes of that backlash was a Reddit poster pretending to be a history professor, fearing that the portrayal of World War II would be confusing to young children learning about the war for the first time. The professor apparently didn't think anyone would look at his post-history to see who was a fraud. Okay, so first of all, let me make something very clear. The problem was not that Battlefield 5 had women in it. As I've shown in previous videos, other games such as Call of Duty Finest Hour had playable characters like Tanya Pavlovna, who served as a sniper on the Eastern Front in the game. This is of course something that makes perfect sense because Russia did indeed employ female snipers on the front lines in World War II. So her character makes perfect sense, and players did not complain one bit about it, because she fit the setting perfectly. By contrast, I can safely say that none of the characters that were shown within the reveal trailer for Battlefield 5 looked like they belonged in a World War II setting at all. And to demonstrate that it's not women or minorities that players had an issue with, let me give you a problem that exists with one of the male character designs within this picture. The British Army specifically banned its personnel from having beards during the war. The reason for this is that while chemical weapons were very, very rarely ever used during World War II, the existence of a beard would mean that a soldier's gas mask would be highly ineffective in the event that he actually needed it. The other white male character depicted within this artwork was the guy carrying the katana around, and he also received his fair share of ridicule within the gaming community as well as being historically inaccurate and ridiculous. So yes, Battlefield 5 failed when it came to historical accuracy, but it even failed at basic authenticity as well. The reveal trailer was so poorly done that many of the people that I've spoken with had trouble even determining that it was actually from World War II. In fact, I even had some people desperately trying to defend this game on my YouTube comments in some of my videos. But the game's reveal trailer was simply so poorly done that they legitimately could not determine which armies were depicted within it. Now, these problems wouldn't be quite so bad if Battlefield 5 was marketed as being this silly, ridiculous, over-the-top experience that was not meant to be taken seriously at all. Unfortunately, that is not how DICE marketed it. In fact, here is footage from the reveal event where they actually tried to market the game as being historically accurate and authentic.
You know, in playing Battlefield, I know everyone in the audience will agree with me, people at home as well. I've always been impressed by the level of realism in the game. I remember once I was playing with a friend who served in Special Forces, and we were talking about our favorite guns, and I was talking about the recoil and what I liked about the sights versus other guns. And he turned to me at one point and he said, "Oh, where did you serve?" And I felt embarrassed because I was like, "Oh, Battlefield 3, that's where I was." And instead of him being angry, he was like, "I didn't know that there was a game that was that immersive, something that really was as true to real without being a war simulation as possible." I've been a huge fan of war stories, the single-player campaign in Battlefield 1. What I truly enjoyed about it was I felt like I was learning about the stories behind the war and playing through the stories of the war, and it didn't always end well. And what I loved is, because of that history element, like for instance, I told my little brother, I said, "Hey, if Mom ever catches you playing, just say this is a history class that you're doing on the console." And then what I'd do is I'd tell my mom he was going to do that so she would know that I was always her favorite. And what was great was seeing the story. Lars, like, how is single player going to change in Battlefield 5?
Don't tell this to my kids. Well, are they changing? I mean, to me, I'm happy that you like the war stories. And for us, the war stories are really our opportunity to put the war into perspective. It's really about those human and untold stories of the war. And we try to portray those kind of real and relatable people facing epic warfare. And it's Battlefield after all, so we'll be talking a lot here today about the gameplay improvements. So player agency is key, so you can create your own Battlefield moments. And at the bottom line, it's about allowing you to witness the Second World War, but through the eyes of the men and women that changed the world.
You've given me a sneak peek, and so many words come to my mind. I mean, intense, immense, powerful. Ryan, Do you have a specific way that you want players to see this Battlefield?
Well, I think the best way we can describe it is immersive. I mean, this needs to feel like the most immersive Battlefield that players have ever played. I mean, we want them to exploit the Battlefield in ways they've never been able to before. I mean, when you look at the chaotic multiplayer that the franchise is known for, and sort of fan classics like Conquest, and some of the new modes that the guys are working on like Airborne, you know, we're going back with war stories, sort of that anthology storytelling that we had, we built in BF1, and telling new stories about men and women that change history. I mean, we get to tell everyone today that co-op is back in Battlefield 5, and that's a huge thing for us. And this is just the beginning. I mean, launch is just the beginning for this game, and we really want to take players on a journey through World War II.
So as you can see, players were well within their rights to be upset by what they got from the trailer and later from the game itself. But even that wasn't what ultimately catapulted Battlefield 5 into the infamy that it got from the player base. While the trailer was definitely abysmal and disliked by both fans and the community at large, the real problem didn't start until DICE decided to attack the fan base in general, with Patrick Soderlund leading the charge by saying the now infamous quote, "If you don't like it, don't buy it," as well as the hashtag Everyone's Battlefield that was meant to counter the hashtag Not My Battlefield that the community had started. And this is where the comparisons between Battlefield 5 and Fallout 76 start to take root. In both examples, there was a massive marketing disconnect between what we were told to expect and what we actually got. In the case of Battlefield 5, it was the marketing team telling us that we would be getting a historically accurate and authentic experience. In the case of Fallout 76, it was the marketing team's promises regarding pre-order bonuses as well as the game being finished at launch. And in both cases, the companies involved disastrously handled their attempts at damage control. Now, when it comes to the argument that regenerating health somehow validates having other historically inaccurate elements within your game, let me just say something else here. And that is the fact that quite a few gamers have been complaining about the regenerating health mechanics that are common within games these days. So the argument that you never hear about it is actually flat out false when all is said and done, and it completely invalidates the author's whole point that they were trying to desperately make. Now, I must confess here that the story of the professor on Reddit was something that I was completely ignorant of. However, I did try looking it up. Unfortunately, I could not find it at all. This, of course, leads me to deduce that the story was most likely insignificant at best, if not outright fabricated, which, considering the other fallacies that the author has made within this article so far, that's not quite a stretch to make, is it? It feels funny until you read Joshua Green's Devil's Bargain, where he details how Steve Bannon saw Gamergate as an inspiration for weaponizing online outrage that eventually, among other things, led to Donald Trump storming the White House. Or how fallen far-right icon Milo Yiannopoulos was so impressed with the movement and used Breitbart, which he edited then, to convert these angry gamers to politics. It's not so funny then when you realize the hate from these virtual places bleed into the very real world more than you realize. You know, this argument that the author is trying to make is actually rather amusing when you think about it. He's essentially complaining about politics being in games, whereas the agenda for the social justice movement for a while has been putting politics into games. So he seems to be unhappy that the consequences of doing that aren't exactly what he's wanting. To EA and DICE's credit, they haven't backed from their decision to include women and minorities in the game. A DICE developer commented after the reveal that if people were bothered by it so much, they shouldn't play it. Despite what appears to be a soft launch, no official numbers have been released, but the game had steep discounts after only a week on the market, and the player base online seems much lower than earlier releases. EA pushed a hashtag Everyone's Battlefield hashtag to promote the game after release. Those gestures, unfortunately, were met with even more rage. The game's main Reddit page was filled with comments of gloating that the game underperformed, combined with the same familiar hatred for new representation. Even as writing this, the main Battlefield Reddit is filled with people ready to pounce at anything positive about the game, or anything about these new additions at least. Many of the members and moderators fled to a dedicated BFV Reddit in the fallout. Okay, so there's actually quite a bit of misinformation that we need to unpack from all that, so let's take it from the top, shall we? First of all, the notion that EA and DICE haven't backed down is actually quite false when you actually get into the nitty and gritty of it, because as I've explained in detail, the problem wasn't having women and minorities within the game. And what do I mean about EA and DICE backing down? Well, how about this article here where they say that they've rolled back the cosmetic changes because of how crazy they were? Let's actually quote one of the DICE employees on this subject matter specifically. "We heard the community. We're still looking at World War II through DICE's lens, but how forward, how crazy we got with some of that? We heard the community. We understand that there were some concerns about, hey, where's the authenticity? We want players to be excited about customizing their characters with authentic gear. We dialed it back a bit. It was pretty crazy. We wanted to offer some authenticity. That's important to us. That's important to our players." Now, of course, Battlefield 5 does indeed still have limited minorities in it, but as I've said previously and repeatedly, that is not the problem that players had. So yes, DICE and EA did indeed back down, regardless of what this author wants you to believe. And also there is a fair amount of very real evidence that shows that Battlefield 5 is not only doing worse than its main competitor this year, Call of Duty Black Ops 4, but it's also doing worse than its predecessor Battlefield 1, and by wide margins. To those on the outside, it all may seem strange and surreal. Maybe less so with how strange and surreal our everyday life has become. But still, we're talking about video games, an art form still in its infancy, where polygons crafted to look like people shift around in simulated environments. What is all the fuss about? And why is it that a group of people take it so seriously to such a visceral response? The simple answer is that it's not really about the game, or games in general. It's about something far more simple and primal: hate. Okay, so first of all, can we stop making the argument that video games are somehow an art form still within its infancy? Yes, video games are still comparatively new, but they've been out for decades now. The Magnavox Odyssey came out in the 1970s. Prior to that, you had computer games like Space War come out in 1962, and Bertie the Brain, a tic-tac-toe game, in 1950. At this point, it's quite ridiculous to suggest, considering how far we've come and over such a wide span of time, that video games are still an art form within their infancy. They are not. Secondly, despite what the author would have you believe, the reason that gamers are so upset is not a matter of hate. It's actually a matter of love and respect. Specifically, love for these franchises that are getting slowly tarnished, and respect for the historical settings and time periods that these games are depicting. Next year will be the 80th anniversary of World War II's official start. It's impossible to relive that, even in the best and closest representation that can be crafted. From the standard video games of today to the budding technology in virtual and augmented reality that can put you in the simulation, it will never be more than that. The days of the war are over. The soldiers who died are gone forever. We can do nothing but look back at the imperfect doppelgangers portraying the sweat, blood, and flesh that fell to the mud during it. But the hate that drove so much of the atrocities of World War II is still here, and in bitter irony, the reaction to the game depicting it has shown that it still lingers as much today as it did back then. It's a beast in hibernation toward what may be an inevitable and unstoppable awakening. Okay, so first of all, congratulations to those of you who are still here. This paragraph was the reason I ultimately decided to make this video, and why I think this is one of the worst articles I have ever seen. Basically, this journalist has just stated that he believes that the gamers that are ranting against Battlefield 5 are in fact literal Nazis, and that they will one day try to commit the same atrocities that the Nazis did. If you actually read the paragraph, that's actually what he is saying, which is amazing. It's beyond belief, but it's exactly what this person wrote, and expects to be paid for, and expects people to believe. Alright, so I'm just going to finish these last two paragraphs for us as quickly as possible. You ready? In W.B. Yeats' haunting poem, Second Coming, the narrator talks about technology swirling out of control and how the world crumbles around him. While the poem is about World War I, it can apply just as much to World War II. One can argue the world wars were really one big war with a long interlude. It's hard not to feel echoes of that in all this, in how under the nose of many, a technology designed as not much more than an elaborate toy, and the forms to discuss those that play with them, became weapons of hate, while those in control of both either seem ineffective or unwilling to do anything against it. The battles, locations, and soldiers of Battlefield 5 aren't real, no matter how accurate they may strive to recreate the blood, uniforms, weapons, tanks, and all the terrible things of that war. It's all just a big simulation. We can only look at imperfect images in a dirty and cracked mirror from the past. But alongside these recreations, something very real shambles forth. As the new year dawns, it feels like the worst are full of passionate and intensity once again. And who knows what truly is coming to this new age to be born soon. And that's the end of the article, and I'm sure you can tell now why I decided to cover it in this video. The fact that someone considers this to be reality is beyond bizarre and absurd, but unfortunately this is what we have to deal with this day and age. Of course, by making videos like this, I help discredit these journalists even more than they are able to themselves by spreading the word out so that even more people are aware of this kind of nonsense. And it does at least seem to work when larger YouTubers do this as well, as the credibility of mainstream media has actually gone downhill quite a bit recently. But what do you expect when articles like this exist? In any case, that's the end of the video, so hope to see you guys again soon. Take care. Ace out.